In this chapter, I'd like to discuss Plink, which is a synth model that I've created for doing both synthesizer sounds and electric piano sounds. First of all, let me step through the presets real quick so you can hear the variety of sounds that this is able to make. So that's EP1. That's EP2. That's EP3. That's EP4. And that's EP5. Now I'm going to play the synth sounds real quick. This is synth 1. Synth 2. Synth 3. Synth 4. And synth 5. Okay, what I'd like to do next is show you the DSP that I used to create this program and explain more or less how it works. Okay, so let's go to the ALG page, and we're on layer 1. So the heart of this is the shape saw oscillator. The shape saw can morph between a sine wave and a sawtooth wave, and that's passed through a 2-pole high-pass filter. The signal then goes through an all-pass filter, through a wrap block, a sine plus block, and a shaper. And that's the meat of the sound. These other two layers, layer 3 and layer 4, are for selecting which envelope you want to have active on the sound. For instance, with the mod wheel all the way down, I have a piano envelope, like that. If I move the mod wheel all the way up, I have a synth envelope, which is a lead synth envelope. It opens up quickly and it doesn't decay. Okay, so now what I'm going to do in part 2 is I'm going to show you how to use the sliders to create your own sounds with Plink. I now want to demonstrate how to use the sliders to create your own sounds using Plink. So I'm going to select preset 1 over here, and I'm going to zero out the sliders just by moving them up and down to make sure that they're all set to 0 values. And I'm going to move the mod wheel all the way down and make sure that switch is turned off. Okay, so let me step through the sliders real quick and show you what they do and give you some idea about how to use them to create your own sounds. First of all, slider A, first of all, before I get to the sliders, let me play what this sounds like, or demonstrate what this sounds like. So that's with all the sliders all the way down. Over here, sliders H and I are used to control effects. I want to talk about those first, and then we'll get to the sliders that are used for synthesis. So slider H controls chorus, and it controls the chorus amount that's being applied. And slider I controls reverb. Okay, and SW here controls an envelope filter. So let me turn that on real quick and you can hear what it sounds like. Okay, so let's talk about doing your own sounds with this program. Slider A controls your wave shape. So with it all the way down, you have a sawtooth wave. With it all the way up, you have a sine wave, and you can get different waveforms by putting it at places in between. So for instance, let me just move it real quick. And so you can hear the range of sounds that you can access with that. So once you picked your basic waveform, slider B controls a high-pass filter that has a fixed resonance of 6 dB at the cutoff point. So for instance, I'm going to sweep this right now and you can hear the effect that has. Okay, slider C controls an all-pass filter. Because we're using wrap and we're using shaper in the DSP for this particular sound, the all-pass filter is going to have different effects than it would for in other contexts. So let me just sweep this real quick and see if you can hear the difference as I sweep it. And so you can hear what slider C does. Now let's do slider D. Slider D controls wrap. So wrap causes a waveform. If this is, let's say that this is full scale or full volume, and here's your waveform, it shifts it up so that if the waveform cuts off right here, it'll wrap back around and come up below. So wrap can be used to basically as a wave shaper. So this is what that sounds like. And you can go all the way to the point where this particular, the sound coming out of this oscillator over here is pretty much noise. Okay, so slider E controls the pitch of a sine plus block. Okay, so you have basically a sawtooth wave going through filters and wrap into a sine plus block into a shaper. So these three essentially form an FM operator. So as I sweep the frequency of E, or as I sweep the frequency of this sine plus, you can hear its effect. And it sounds very much like it sounds when you sweep the frequency of an operator in an FM algorithm. And you have 2 octaves there of range on that particular slider. So now slider F controls shaper. With it all the way down, shaper amount is set to 1, which means that this, again, if this is set to sawtooth wave and you're going through the sine plus block into the shaper, that's going to be your FM algorithm. However, you can turn down shaper by moving this up. So in many instances, shaper amount kind of acts almost like filter cutoff. If you want to think about it that way, that's actually a pretty useful way to think about it. Okay, so slider G controls gain. So there's a gain block that comes after all of this. And by doing that, you can add a little bit of bright distortion to the top end of the frequency spectrum. Okay, so as I played with this program, as I've been working on the presets and as I was working on putting together these videos, these are basically the sort of the guidelines I've come up with for making useful sounds, at least useful electric piano sounds, with this program. So first of all, I like to pick a basic tone with slider A. If I want something that's almost clavinet sounding, for instance, I'll leave it down so that I have a sharper sound, and I'll turn gain up. Now also, for instance, if I want this to have a sharp sound, I'll put in some shaper, or I mean some wrap, excuse me. Okay, and I may mess around with sliders B and slider C to find a tonality that I like. Like I kind of like this. It almost sounds like a very sharp electric piano, almost something like a cross between a Rhodes and a clavinet. Okay. Sliders E and F can be useful for me if I want to, say for instance, I have this very sharp sound, but I want to back it off a little bit. So what I'll do is I'll take out a little bit of the shaper, so I get more of a bell-like tone. So you've got that sort of growl, I guess you could call it, of different kinds of electric pianos, but then I can add in some of the bell tone. And then if I use slider E, I can, for instance, I can add just a little bit of slider E to detune this sine plus wave a little bit relative to the the shape saw oscillator, and that creates a sound kind of like this. That has a bit of motion to it without having to use chorus or other effects. So now let me throw in some chorus on this sound. So that's sort of a very bright, cutting kind of electric piano sound. Let me show you, let's go ahead and throw in the envelope filter. So that, I think, wouldn't be too out of place in, say, for instance, a funk context, or for use with music that you want to have a bit more of a driving rhythm. Okay, so let's think about now how to use this in terms of making synthesizer sounds. So if you think of slider F here, which controls the shaper, as being sort of like your cutoff, then that will give you some guidance on how to use the rest of these sliders to create a sound. So obviously, with this sine plus block, I can do a lot of, I can add in a lot more harmonics. So for instance, this sound that I have right here, I'm going to go ahead and turn on monophonic response and some portamento. It's kind of almost a guitar sounding lead sound. You know, and if I throw in rap, one thing I want to note about this is sometimes you really only need a little bit of something, or you're going to find that you have to move very slowly to find a value that'll work for your particular sound. So as I'm moving these sliders, I'm listening very closely to what's coming out of the speakers to determine if you know, it's something that I want to actually hear. So I kind of like this. There's something right there that I kind of like, and I'm going to mellow it just a tad. There we go. So now we've got this. Let's take off chorus there and let's put on some reverb. So that's, in my opinion, you know, that would be useful as, say, for instance, a lead sound. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a good enough introduction to Plink that you can start using it to create your own sounds. And next chapter, we're going to talk about the next synth model in line, which is called 8-bit.